Validating What Works from Project Ella. The presenters today are Dr. Rafael Lara, who is a professor and director of bilingual programs in the Department of Ed Sci. He's also director of the Center for Research in Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition. Dr. Lara has managed numerous national and international grants and contracts and 3 major longitudinal randomized trials. He is director of the Transitional Bilingual Pedagogy Classroom Theory. Another co-presenter is Dr. Tong, who's associate professor and coordinator of the Bilingual Data Management Center bilingual programs. She's also associate director for the Center of Research in Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition. Her expertise is in the area of methodologies for studying English learners. As a leader in the bilingual research team at TAMU, she has led the team to have 4 research papers to recognize her inclusion in the most recent What Works series. And Dr. Beverly Irby is professor and chair of the Administration Program and associate department head at the Department of Administration and Resource Development at A&M, and she's co-director of the Center for Research in Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition. She's editor of Mentoring Tutoring Journal, as well as senior editor of the Advancing Women in Leadership Journal. She's managed numerous grants related to curriculum development, research, and leadership related to English learners. And the other presenter is Dr. Cindy Guerra, who's a senior research associate and at TAMU. We're delighted that they're being presented. And thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for us to be here. And we want to say thank you very much to our colleague, Dr. Wagner, for this great opportunity. It was a team that we have been working together, trying to set up the best conditions so we can share what we have been doing, I would say since I can say again, 23 years ago. Yes, it's a long investment of time, but we really would like to share with you what actually we have been doing, our recent agenda and future agenda, because we have prepared 145 slides. I really want to go fast, and I'm going to tell more about directly to the point. So I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Beverly Irby, and then Dr. Tong, and my colleague, also Cindy Guerrero, who have been instrumental in implementing those programs. I also want to say thank you to my colleague, Dr. Yolanda Padron, and Hector Rivera, and other colleagues from the department, and another department like TLAC, ERC, for all the time support. Dr. Lenny Smith, who is with us too. I hope that you will enjoy this agenda, and please at the end, I'm sure there's going to be some time for questions, observations, reactions, etc. And we will be more than happy to respond. Thank you again.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for the nice light lunch from the center. We are going to be talking about from Project Ella, English Language and Literacy Acquisition, to Project Ella Validation, which is the English Language and Literacy Acquisition Validation. And Ella was funded by the Institute for Education Sciences, the U.S. Department of Education, 2003 to 2007, and then, of course, after that, we had some extension years. That was one of 3 longitudinal randomized trial studies that has ever been conducted in the United States, funded by the federal government, as I said. The other 2 were funded. One was funded at Texas A&M. One was funded for Johns Hopkins University with Bob Slagan, and the other one was funded with at University of Houston, the Times program with David Francis. And that was a 5-year longitudinal controlled trial study, and it was to determine which instructional delivery model is most effective in promoting English language acquisition and literacy for K-3 students. That's what the government wanted to know. They wanted to know the difference between structured English immersion, all English, versus a transitional bilingual program. And they wanted to know under what circumstances certain students would respond more favorably to this specific model, and following children longitudinally from K through 3. That particular grant was here, as I said, with SMU, with San Diego State University, and it was conducted in Aldine Independent School District. So there's Aldine. We knew that if we had a really good school district, we did select the district, but it was randomized in other ways, that at any rate at the school level. But in Aldine, we knew that if we ended up with something, that we would have something, because we're already doing a great job with their English learners. And so we felt like that since they were a Learning Political Alliance district and a broad winner, and they had great recognition of the state, then we would have something. So here are the demographics for Aldine Independent School District: about 60% Hispanic, 32% African American, 2% Asian, about 4% white, and Native American. And then the Aldine ISD demographics in terms of economically disadvantaged, you can see it's about 82%, about 26% ELL, and that went up this year, and about 90% special education, and they have a pretty high mobility rate as well. This was our Ella research design in the beginning, and initially we did have typical practice, which was our control group, and then we had our enhanced instruction or our treatment group, and then we had an instruction in immersion and transitional bilingual education. This particular project, our intervention, was the same across both types of programs. So any intervention that we did in transitional bilingual was also done instruction English immersion. We also had students in K, 1, 2, 3. This was the only project of the 3 that actually had the same students and did not do add-on students each year. So we monitored the same children every year. So it was a pure longitudinal study. Now that's another presentation about longitudinal studies in school districts, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. This is our intervention design. You can see the difference in the time frame in terms of the English, the amount of English here in enhanced across time. So it's 100% English full day in our structured English immersion. And you can see the difference in our typical practice, which was 80% Spanish, 20% English, 60% Spanish, and 40% English. So we did everything with time. Time was a variable that we actually looked at in terms of our language development in English. So we had 2 levels and 3 tiers. Our 2 levels were staff development, and our level 1 and level 2 with the student instructional intervention. We had tier 1, which was the district language arts, Spanish and English. Tier 2 was our structured ESL, English as second language intervention. And tier 3 was the tutorial section or tier for the struggling students. So we'll look at our staff development very quickly. This was systemic. It was structured training. We monitored, we mentored, we gave feedback to all of our teachers. We did a professional portfolio. We had teachers reflecting. They attended bi-monthly meetings. Every 2 weeks, and then that was for about 3 hours every 2 weeks for training. Teachers were paid to attend the training, and these were some of the topics that we trained in. We also had paraprofessionals in that particular grant. So they attended monthly training sessions and were also trained. Many of those paraprofessionals are now teachers in the district or in surrounding districts. These are some of the training pictures where they were trained in various strategies. And then our student instructional intervention. We had, as I said, Aldine was very much aligned with all of the standards in Texas, of course, and then they were doing great on their tests, and were doing very well with their English language learners. So we already knew that they were doing a good job. We're going to look at Tier 2 interventions. In kindergarten, we had, as I said, 75 minutes. These were our curriculum components. We had academic oral language, which is based on question of the day from Lakeshore. We had storytelling and retelling power of thinking for English language literacy acquisition. We had also some piano intensive English. In first grade, we had the same thing. For first semester, second semester, our students were doing so well that they outperformed in the same piano intensive English, and we moved them to a reading program. And then in second grade, we had academic oral and written language and science. And science permeated this entire, it was really a science-infused literacy intervention is what this particular intervention was. And then we had the Stella, and we had early interventions in reading, level 2. Dr. Mathis from SMU is an author on that, and so she helped us with that particular piece. And then the third grade, we had our content reading integrating science for English language literacy acquisition, or CASELA, and we had Stella. So those were our two components. And the AOWLS that I talked about, the academic oral and written language and science, was actually integrated into the CASELA. So our intervention components, very quickly, we have Cindy Guerrero who's going to share a few of those with you. Our senior research associate.
Hello. So just very quickly, the AOL, which later changed to AOWL, we added the writing component. We went developmentally as the students moved from kindergarten to third grade. So we targeted academic vocabulary, and as Dr. Irby said, we were targeting the science vocabulary. We were using using academic vocabulary in context, really giving the students opportunity to develop their speaking language. We were really helping them and facilitating so they could speak complete sentences. Here's an example of a first grade question. How would you move a large mass of dirt? This would be on a pocket chart. We would have the answer choices. We would go back and talk about what mass is, give them some background knowledge, and then they would select their choice. So for example, one student would say, I would move a large mass of dirt using a wagon because it can move more stuff than others. That may be something a first grader may say. But all of this was related to the science concepts that we're learning in the other parts of the intervention. Again, we said in second grade and third grade, we went into the academic oral language and written. The written components, so these are just a picture of a student writing in her journal. These are some samples from bilingual students. And we can look at these more closely. We will be posting this in a webinar, so you will have a chance to look at these samples at another time as well. Retelling and higher order thinking for English language and literacy acquisition. We call that Stella. So again, we use that component all the way from K to 3. We use authentic children's literature, one book a week. So we spend 45 minutes a week on the same book, going deep into the topics and the language rather than going wide and having a different book each day. We utilize Bloom's taxonomy for questioning. We specifically wrote level questions, some at the lower level to check their comprehension, but then really moving into the mid and high levels to challenge the students. We had some L1 clarifications in their first language when needed, but those were Spanish was only spoken by the paraprofessional because this was English instruction. This was their ESL law.
This is the theory that is based on in terms of the clarifications in the language. So this was a theory by Raphael and Richard Parker that was published in '94, and since then we've had many supportive studies and validation studies conducted on the theory. There is an observation protocol which we'll share with you a little bit later in terms of how we observe the teachers in the classroom. It is really one of the very few bilingual classroom pedagogical observation instruments around. I think that Dr. Waxman, Dr. Drunk have worked on that as well, this particular area. And So this particular theory has time, of course, moving through it, or everything revolving around time, because we know with time, people, we all improve in our second language. And so the language of instruction is, we have language L1, our first language, our native language, and then our native language introducing the second language. These are the two clarifications in between. Or our second language being clarified by our native language. These are things that the teacher would do, or teaching all in the second language. And then we have communication mode. These are a number of combinations of these. This is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But during the observation time, it might be a combination of any of those. And then the language content would be the basic interpersonal skills, communication skills, or the CALC, that's mixed, or the CALC, which is the cognitive academic language proficiency, and that is broken down further. So they broke that further down into observable units, which we call language content, which could be social routines. Hi, how are you? What did you watch on TV last night? Classroom routines, that's getting up, get your next book out or get your papers out, sharpen your pencils and things like that. And then light cognitive content would be like maybe reviews, talking about current events, etc. And then dense cognitive content would be like the deep problem solving or introduction of new material, and so on. And then the activity structure is taken from Good and Brophy's work as well, and we've added some things to that. But it would be like this. I'm lecturing. What are you doing? Listening. So that's a lecture listen. And so anyway, that is the activity structure part of it that we look at. What is the teacher doing and what are the students doing? So all of that we watch together combined in the observations.
Thank you, Dr. Irby. We will also be offering another webinar training specifically on that protocol if you're more interested in that in the future. So we talked about that as related to why we included the paraprofessionals speaking in Spanish as a clarification. And Stella, basically, we said we use the same book over 5 days, and it just kind of gives you an overview of which we do each day. Vocabulary is presented and reviewed every day. They have opportunities to answer level questions, review the story towards the end of the week when they're more familiar. They do interactive group retelling, and at the end they do a science or writing activity at the end of the week. Here's just a quick snapshot of what a lesson plan would look like. It did have all the alignment. We did have it scripted because we were conducting research. We wanted to make sure that the teachers were delivering the curriculum in a similar manner. So what you see in blue is what the students were scripted to say. What you see in black would be the directions for the teachers. And you can see in red, that would be the clarification that the paraprofessional would say in Spanish. So you see it's not a English, Spanish, Spanish. We only use the clarifications for specific areas where students can maybe relate to something that they already knew in their native language. Here's an example of a vocabulary card. We would show a visual with the word. On the back, we have a student-friendly definition and then sentence stem. Because again, we want to enhance their vocabulary, but we also want to give them opportunities to use that vocabulary in context. Skip through that. Here's just some pictures of we integrated different organizers as they were learning content area. We wanted to give them ways to organize the information they were learning. One of the other components we had in kindergarten in the first part of first grade was Santillana Intensive English. This was promoting oral language development. It had integrated different content areas, a little bit of math, social studies, and science. It came in cards, so that the students would look at a card projected on a document camera, so they would see something similar to this. And then on the back were some areas that the teacher would call their attention to. That was a math card on time. Here's an example of a social studies kind of unit, like in the past, home song ago. And you can see in the back that there are many different activities the teachers would use with the students, but we specifically picked out the parts that we thought would benefit the students the most and highlighted those, such as yesterday, today, and tomorrow, some collaborative activities, vocabulary development. There was some living awareness as well. Then, as Dr. Irby said, we found that our students, because we were longitudinal, these students were with Santillana for their kindergarten year and half of first grade. And they really were performing very well, and they kind of outgrew the program. So we moved them into the second part of first grade into a direct reading instruction, because they were ready for that. So we went into early interventions in reading. Again, this is a product that Dr. Mathis at SMU, who is also part of our study, she's co-author on this. So we had 45-minute sessions. Originally, this curriculum was developed to be used as a tier 3 with struggling students. You have 3 to 5 students in a group with a teacher. But with Dr. Mathis' assistance, we adapt that to the whole class, 45-minute sessions 5 days a week. And of course, it incorporates all the important components of reading. Here's an example. You can tell this is back in the day because we had the big TVs and VCRs, which now we have document cameras. But here's an example of a teacher teaching them some of those letter sound combinations and word parts that are so tricky for students who are learning to read English as a second language. So we directly taught those parts to increase their fluency, which we know also helps to increase their comprehension. There's an example. They have their own readers and chapter books. And then in third grade, content reading and science for English language and literacy acquisition, we call that COSELA. This is a full science curriculum, so we did have a science curriculum from Scott Forsman, but we didn't use it in the traditional manner where it's front to back. We really used it because of the great science expository informative text that the book offers. So we can, if you kind of look over the longitudinal aspect of the program, in kindergarten, we're working on oral language and listening and speaking in first grade. In second grade, we're working on direct reading and teaching. Now in third grade, they were reading well in English. Now it's time to move them into that expository text to help prepare them for when they move up to the grade levels. So we enhanced the text material to provide kind of an overlay, and we, on top of using the science text, we did incorporate some direct reading instruction. We had partner reading, word reading instruction, visuals, graphic organizers, vocabulary extensions. We did teach them how to look and analyze some of the text structures with expository text. Of course, there were vocabulary cards related to science. There were level readers that the students were able to access. Here's a student, here's a picture of the students. Of course, students are interested in science, so we took advantage of using some inquiry activities to hook them and get them excited what they're learning about. And so you can see they worked in groups, which also helped facilitate their oral language as they were learning about these different science concepts. And you can't really see it, this is one of my favorite pictures. This little girl, has her goggles on, and her little tongue is out. And if you ever been in the classroom, when their tongues are out, they're serious. They're like working really, really hard. So she was really working hard on her lab and answering the questions after that. And then here they go outside as well to do different kinds of activities. And this again is a sample of what the COSELA lesson plan may look like. You can see the alignment. Again, it is scripted like we talked about for research purposes. This is the word reading instruction. We would directly teach them word parts and syllables and decoding, so they, when they went into the expository text, they are more prepared and ready to read it. Extensions of vocabulary, such as multiple meaning, trying to go synonyms and antonyms. They did do partner reading as well, which was very, very effective for those students. And then in tier 3, we're still in level 2. We're talking about the student in instructional intervention. But for tier 3, for those most struggling students, we had paraprofessionals that were trained to pull them for their own intervention as well. They were identified by the Dibbles protocol as having a lower level of reading fluency. So in kindergarten, they worked with communication games. You can see in first grade, in the fall, they had communication games. Then they went to small groups for the direct reading instruction, and the same in second grade and third grade. They continued to work with the direct instruction, but one level perhaps below the other students, so we can fill in the gaps and get them where they needed to be. And here's some pictures of paraprofessionals working with the small groups. And so that's a very quick overview of the intervention component.
Probably won't have time to go over all of our qualitative measures, but these are some of the things that we did. We did interview pencils, we had reflections with the portfolios, we had the future portfolios, and we had field notes from classroom observations. This is a bricolage representation of bricolage. We did have a bricolage completed on this and on this project. So this represents paraprofessionals, the students' work, and the teachers and their work and how all of that fit together. So that is actually displayed if you're ever on the corner of Gulf Bank and Airline. This is a 15 by 15 actual presentation that's physically on the wall in the cafeteria. So please go by there. We're going to have a small one in the Center for Research and Development in Pure Language Acquisition. So we're going to be sharing that. This is one of the cards from one of the students. Ella helped me to know how to read better. This was our favorite card. We also had an art therapist to look at these cards and help us with some of the meaning of the cards. So this one was a very interesting one. Here's another one, which was an interesting one. Project Ella helps us read better because we always read. And when we learn all vocabulary cards, it helps me a lot because I know how to read long words, and I am bilingual. I know I answer my questions right, and I speak it right. So that's one of our cards that we got. Our quantitative data, this was first, our observation protocol was first put on to PDA. It is now web-based, so all the principals will be being trained on the protocol, and we also use a teacher observation method or a tour. And we have student outcomes. Dr. Tong is going to share some of those.
It's always very exciting to share our findings with our audience, but it's also a big challenge because we have to share quickly our results for the 5 years within probably 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll have to really hurry up and try to share with you some of the highlights of our findings. So this is a table of all the instruments that were used in this original project Ella to measure students' language and literacy acquisition in English, and we also have the same table for their native language, which is Spanish. So you can see that we measure their oral proficiency here, their phonemic awareness, their decoding skills, their reading comprehension. I think it's not shown here, but it's their reading fluency. So everything is related to their oral language, their decoding, their reading comprehension. And then these are the instruments that we used, and it was a repeated measure, so we measured over time at the beginning of the kindergarten. Some of them were given in the beginning, some were given the first time in the beginning of the first grade, and then repeatedly end of the first, end of the second, and then end of the third. So it was a longitudinal over time measurement. And in terms of the data analysis strategy, because the data were nested, there were peak time points nested within the student, and the student nested within the classroom within the school. So we used the hierarchical linear modeling framework as a way to analyze the data more properly to control for overestimation. And these are the different models with different notations. So basically, we have level 1, which was the repeated time point that students were measured at that time. Then we have the level 2, which was student or the class depending on the questions that we would like to address. And then level 3 is the classroom or the school level. And by the way, school was the unit of randomization. So we randomly assigned the schools to either the treatment or the control condition. And by the end of the third grade, we had a total of 390 students from 44 classrooms and 22 schools. Now remember, we had a longitudinal design. So what you saw earlier with the original Ella design, we had more than, of course, 400 students. We started with about 800 students, but because of the longitudinal nature of the design, that we had a huge attrition rate. So by the end, we had 400 students who were started in the beginning of the kindergarten and who went through the whole intervention through the end of the third grade. And now we have 4 major research questions to address, and I'll just try to go quickly to share with you some of the highlights of the findings. So the first research question, we looked at the difference between treatment and treatment. So this is treatment versus treatment, but we looked at the difference between the bilingual program and the English immersion program. So both groups of students received the same intervention, but the bilingual kids were also receiving native language instruction beyond the intervention period of time. And what we saw here is their performance from the beginning of the kindergarten to the end of the third grade on letter word identification, which is a decoding skill in English. And as you can see that this red line represents the bilingual treatment, and then the blue line represents the English immersion treatment. And it's very evident that the bilingual kids, they were outperforming by the end of the third grade. They demonstrate a higher growth rate, and they were outperforming by the end in the English letter word identification measure. This is a similar pattern with the bilingual and the English immersion on the treatment conditions. And the bilingual kids, again, they experienced a faster growth rate, significantly faster growth rate over time, and they were able to narrow the gap and hopefully to close the gap by the end of the third grade. And that was the measure on picture vocabulary, which is an expressive lexical knowledge skill measure on English. Now this is the control versus control. So we looked at the difference between bilingual and English immersion who were exposed to the treatment, and now we look at those students in the bilingual and English immersion who were only receiving the typical practice in English. This is the picture vocabulary that the bilingual kids who received the typical practice, they were lagging behind in the beginning, and they were able to develop, but not as fast as the bilingual experimental kids. So they were still lagging behind by the end of the third grade as compared to the English immersion students who received the typical practice. Again, the similar pattern on text comprehension in English. So this is the first question. We look at treatment versus treatment between bilingual and ESL. Now we look at the difference between treatment versus control within each program model. And here what we see is the difference between the English immersion experimental and English immersion control. So we look at English immersion students only, but we compare the difference between the treatment and control. What you see here is that the blue line, the blue solid line represents the typical practice control English immersion students, and then the red dotted line represents the English immersion treatment students. So they start pretty much at a similar level at the beginning of the kindergarten, but as they moved along through the intervention, by the end of the third grade, then the English immersion students, again, they were outperforming the control students. And they also demonstrate a faster growth rate over time. This is on the listening comprehension, which is receptive language skills, oral language skills. And this is the similar pattern on text comprehension, which measures a student's skills in comprehending written discourse. And the English immersion experimental kids, again, they were a little bit lagging behind in the beginning of the kindergarten. I think this is the beginning of the first grade because they were too challenging for kindergartners to be measured in their English comprehension. So we started to measure them at the beginning of the first grade. So again, they experienced the faster growth over time as compared to those students who were receiving the typical practice. So again, they outperformed their control peers over time. Now here's the difference between treatment and control, but within the bilingual model. So these are the bilingual students. And the red line represents the bilingual experimental, the blue line represents the bilingual control. And it's very evident that our bilingual experimental kids demonstrate a faster growth over time. They were pretty much similar in the beginning, at the beginning of the kindergarten, but they were able to develop faster on blending phonemes, which was one of the measures of phonemic awareness, which is related to pre-literacy skills in English. Similar pattern on text comprehension. These are other English measures. And the bilingual experimental students, they outperform the control over time. And the third question, we look at the different student level, school level, teacher level, and classroom level characteristics that might also impact the student outcome, because that addressed one of our questions as to what condition or under what circumstances the students will respond favorably to one type of program model. So we'll try to skip here real quickly and move on to the next part of that. This is what we would like to highlight with you about the teacher practice, because we observed, as Dr. introduced, we observed the teacher practice in the classroom, so we know what they were doing, and we want to also measure if what they were doing reflect the intervention, and then we can compare the teacher performance between the treatment and the control condition. And this is the language of instruction, and what I would like to draw your attention is the two parallel lines, the light green and then the light blue lines. The light green is L2T, which is the time the teachers spend in teaching English. L2 is English for these students. Their native language is Spanish and their second language is English. The light blue line, if you look at the legend, is L2 with the students. So that's the time that the students were talking in English. So this is the kindergarten pattern, and I would like to remember that pattern and as we move on to first grade, the 2 lines, second grade, the top 2 lines, and third grade, the top 2 lines. So what do we see here, or what do we have observed in this project is that what the teacher was saying reflected what the students were saying. So if the teachers spend more time in teaching English, then it's more likely for their students to respond in the same language. And this is what we expected, because this is particularly ESL time that was designed to improve students' oral and literacy skills in English. Doesn't matter if it's a bilingual program or if it's an English immersion program. This is the ESL time that was specifically allocated for developing language skills in English. Now let's move on to the language content. As Dr. already introduced again, there were social routine and adaptive routine, and then there were light and dense cognitive. So what do we see here again? The pattern is that in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, that the teachers spend more time. This is the frequency in terms of the time allocation during the observational time, that the teachers spend more time in teaching the cognitive. When we move to third grade, there was an increase in terms of the time allocation in dense cognitive, and this is also what we expected, and particularly when we move into the content area instruction with the science embedded. And also what we saw here is that we have the 4 cells, the English immersion, experimental, which is the blue bar, and this is the green bar, which represents the bilingual experimental. So the two bars are the 2 treatment conditions. We saw is that teachers spend more time in teaching the dense cognitive area to the students. And then comparatively speaking, there was less % of time for teachers to allocate to teach the dense cognitive in the 2 control condition, which is the red bar and then the corporation bar. The last question we looked at is also the interaction effect between the student characteristics, teacher characteristics, and the school characteristics that impact the outcome, the final outcome. And this is one of the measures that we found the difference among the 4 different cells that we have English immersion, we have bilingual, and then within English immersion we have treatment and control. Within bilingual we have treatment and control. So what do we see here is that they pretty much start at the same level of segmenting words, which is also a phonemic awareness measure in English. And the 3 models, which is the English immersion experimental, which is the first line, the dotted line. The second solid line is the English immersion typical. The third line, the red dotted line, is the bilingual treatment. So basically, these 3 lines, they develop at somewhat similar rate with the English immersion students demonstrate the fastest, while the only lagging behind group is what we see here, the bilingual treatment. I'm sorry, the bilingual control condition, or typical practice students. So meaning that if these students were not exposed to equality instruction, they probably will be lagging behind. And as they move on to the grade level, they were underperforming as compared to the other grade groups, unfortunately. And this is an interesting pattern that we observe because when we talk about signal language acquisition, there's always a perception in favor of the female students. It seems like female students acquire a signal language faster, in a better rate as compared to their male counterparts. Now here, what we found in our project is a little bit different from what the research has already reported. The first 2 lines, the first 2 dotted lines were the treatment conditions, the male treatment and the female treatment. So what you see here is that they pretty much develop at the same level. There's no gender difference at all between female and the male students if they were in the treatment conditions. But for the 2 solid lines, there is difference in terms of the growth rate over time. And what we see here is actually the blue or kind of, I'm blank with the color, but it's kind of the blue line, which is the male typical practice. So that's the male students in the control condition. And they were actually developing faster than their female counterparts who were also in the typical practice. So with quality intervention, the gender difference is probably minimal, or it's invisible. But with typical practice, we do observe some type of gender difference. But either female or male advantage is still inconclusive. And this is also another very interesting finding that I want to share with you too. The four lines represent students who were enrolled in the district pre-K program and those who were exposed to intervention or NAMs. So the first two dotted lines represent students in the treatment condition. The blue line represents the students in the treatment condition without being enrolled in the district pre-K program before they entered into treatment. The red line represents those students who were enrolled in the district program and who were exposed to intervention. So as you can see that these two lines, they again developed in a parallel pattern, and they were outperforming the students who were not receiving any intervention. And if we move on to look at these two solid lines, what do we see here? This red line is the typical practice or the control condition, but these were the students who were enrolled in the district pre-K program before they started their school. So what we see here is also a very interesting case study for the particular district where the project was implemented to show the quality of their district pre-K program, especially for students who were not exposed to or who did not have the opportunity to be exposed to an intervention. They actually developed better than those students who were not involved in the district pre-K program over there. And this is the last graph of those outcome measures that we gave, and this is the teacher vocabulary in English again. And we added one more line, which is the black line, that represents the reference, or that represents a normal functioning native English-speaking student would perform at the same time point or at the same grade level. So you can see that there is a gap in the beginning of the kindergarten. Of course, these are native Spanish-speaking students, so they were English language learners. They had limited English proficiency to begin with. But after the 4 years of schooling, that they were able to catch up, and there is still a gap, but they were able to catch up. And particularly with this green line, which represents the bilingual experimental, they demonstrate a very consistent pattern. There is no dip along the way. They were just developing, and they were actually accelerating in terms of their vocabulary skills. So they were able to catch up at a given time. And we know that with the given theories and the literature, that it takes time for a second language learner to learn the academic language. It's not just 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So it takes time for them to acquire the academic language, but they are able to catch up. And I don't know if we have time to share with this one, yeah. So, but we'll be posting everything on our website, so you'll be able to see that.
I'm not going to go over this. I want to get to one other slide. This is our L model. This is what Cindy Guerrero mentioned earlier. We began with the base for language. We moved into direct reading instruction, and then we into continuity reading with science. So science permeated all of that. When we do that with integrated research-based ESL strategies, which we did study the ESL strategies, many of the ESL strategies that you find in maybe the Harold and Jordan book or some other books that have just come out lately with ESL strategies are there, but they have not been tested with English language learners. They're good strategies, like the advanced organizer. I mean, we would all use that, but it hasn't really been tested. So what we did was we were able to test some of these strategies and then continue using those. And then we did align those with standards. They were aligned with national standards and state standards. And we'll get to that in just back to that in a moment. And we increased the time in structured English instruction. And we had teacher training and monitoring and paraprofessionals for struggling learners. So what does all of that do? That just increased student achievement for English learners. So we disseminated this in 12 peer-reviewed articles, AERJ, DSJ, Elementary School Journal, JER. 3 were included in the most what works experience tabs. 5 manuscripts under review or in preparation, 11 dissertations, 50+ presentations, And then we've had an NSF grant as well that extended the work into 5th and 6th grade. We had one article already published in, actually 2 articles published, but one in the Journal of Research and Science Teaching. And that particular one is in the going to be in the What Works Clearinghouse. And we've had 2 dissertations come out of that one. And these are all of the journals. Now, we get to LD really quickly. Okay, so we got the $16.5 million based on this. You said, oh, well, we had a lot of attrition, but our attrition rates were we were able to calculate those, and it met the standard for the I3 program. And also, we had to have strong evidence going into to have a validation grant. Well, moderate evidence, moderate to strong. You had to have strong evidence going into a scaling grant. So these are now our school districts that we're working with on the LOB project, the validation, the innovation I3 grant, and Houston ISD, Aldine, Spring Branch, Brownsville, Donna, Laredo, and United. And so that is to validate now the interventions that you saw. We're breaking them apart. So it's like, for example, a school district would say, well, we just want to do 2nd grade. We don't really know. We know collectively and comprehensively and longitudinally what this program does. But by specific grade level and by breaking out those pieces of the intervention, you saw the comprehensive interventions that we did at each grade level. We don't know specifically what that might look like. And so the government was interested in knowing about that. So we are working among 75 elementary schools, 2 teachers per school. And we have randomly assigned the schools to the intervention. And this will be 28 weeks. We're starting with 3rd grade. We're working backwards. So year 1 is 3rd grade. We're just now in testing phase. We will hopefully begin intervention the end of September to have a 28-week intervention. The problem is that there was a hurricane down at Brownsville. It impacted, closed the schools, and so we lost a couple of days of testing. So we want to start everybody at the same time, and so that might impact our start date, and we might not get the 27 weeks of intervention for 3rd grade. And then we'll go to 2nd grade, and then we'll go to 1st, and then we'll go to kindergarten. And so we selected all districts with 6,000 plus enrollment. We looked at all those districts. We looked at the TLAC with 50 plus ELLs in 11, 12, because those were 1st graders who are now 3rd graders. These are our 3rd graders. So we had to have at least 40 on the campus who would enroll in the program and who would be in the program. So we categorized the schools by TLAC by beginning, intermediate, advanced, or advanced high. We clustered those by 3, and we looked at percent of SES and ELLs, and we clustered those by 3 in each district. And then based on that, we randomly selected the 25 clusters. We have 25 clusters in terms of these 25 are treatment 1, these 25 are treatment 2, and these 25 are control. And then those schools were assigned to conditions. So we have 75 schools, 150 classrooms, and about 3,000 students. So sorry, I don't know why it's not going back now. Oh, there it goes. Okay, this looks very similar, but in a backwards model. You can see that our treatment 1 is Stella, our treatment 2 is Stella, plus the AOWLS, which we went over, and then you can see the EIR2 and our Stella. So you can see our treatments, treatment 2s are pretty similar all throughout, but at the different grade levels. Treatment 1 changes throughout. And then we also changed the condition in terms of the training for the teachers. We have there now is one of our official partners. It is an observation camera in the classrooms. Teachers turn it on. It's not a spy camera, but they turn it on, and we will be training them on how to use that. And then we will be observing through that. We have a system set up in the office to do that. And then we also will be training them virtually. So that is a different condition, an altered condition. So we're training virtually. In addition to the virtual training for the treatments, we are working with something we call Ella-versity. English Language Literacy Acquisition Varsity. So it's virtual, but it's a university as well. So we're training for professional learning in that, and what I call a MOOCL. You know MOOCs, Massive Open Online Course. Well, these are MOOCLs, Massive Open Online Professional Learning. So we're going to be doing those as well through Ella-versity. And we have a new partner, effective as of this morning. We have the Center for Urban Education Research, and as well as a partner on this, is going to be also helping us with some culturally responsive pedagogy, but it's going to be being trained in the Ella-versity. Now, the Ella-versity goes out to the teachers on those campuses first that we're partnering with. Then it's going to be recorded, just like this is being recorded, as a webinar, because Citrix GoToMeeting is one of our official partners, major partner in this, and so they're going to get licensed, and they're going to be training as well. So we will have all of the teachers eventually in the state of Texas have access to the trainings on ESL strategies, on partner reading, on culturally responsive pedagogy, et cetera, et cetera. So we would love, if anyone wants to do some Ella-versity MOOCLs, we would love for you to be engaged in that. We'll give you a license to do that with our Citrix. And then these are our tests that we're using for this time around and at different grade levels that you can see. Those have been up there for you to look at. We're currently in the initial implementation phase for LOD. And so the next phase of the Ella story, stay tuned.